Do you guys remember a while back when we did that video discussing whether Hades was a lore-accurate god in Smite? Well, we're gonna do the same thing for Merlin. So, we're going to be going over his design, lore, kit, and all of that good stuff, and determining whether or not he's actually fairly loyal to his lore, or not so much. So, starting things off here, Merlin looks to be a somewhat middle-aged man, but his actual age is ambiguous. The devs wanted to do something unique with Merlin's design that broke away from the traditional wise mage aesthetic. But lore-wise, this works because Merlin had been serving kings as an advisor or provided magical services for a great many years. We don't exactly know how many kings he outlived, but the man outlived many kings, so he's not conforming to the usual rules of age, besides appearing as an old man in the legends. In one of his stories, Merlin is a young demon child, and demons don't age in the same way humans do, or thanks to their immortality aren't affected by age in the same way. That's just one explanation for this lengthy lifespan of his, but even as a demon, he could still die. In some variations of the Wild Man Merlin story, he's actually representing a holy force, or a force of good. So there's another possible explanation for his longevity. In fact, even in the demon child story with Merlin, he's kind of a paradoxical character because whilst he was the son of a demon, he's also representing a more quote-unquote good or holy side, if you will. Now, moving on to the lore itself, in many of Merlin's stories, we don't necessarily see Merlin during the process of him foreseeing the future, spreading the rumor of the sword and the stone. Of course, he already set this plan in motion before Ingrid and Uther got it on. But in the Wild Man Merlin story, we sort of do see a lot more of a human element to Merlin, and we even see him as he's coming up with some of his prophecies, when he's sort of giggling or laughing to himself whilst he's in the presence of the king, and then the king sort of asks him what's so funny. I only bring this up because in the Smite story, this is also mentioned in some text. Merlin almost wets himself when he has some of the dreams or visions of Jormungandr, or the dragon in his dreams, which is, you know, just before he ultimately sends the dragon between the realms. He wasn't completely prepared, or as prepared as he is for the news by the time the chapter finishes, so he gets over it, I guess, but we can really see that more human element of Merlin's character, which I thought was a nice touch, because we don't necessarily get that sense from Merlin in a lot of the other stories from the other original writers, so it's kind of an unknown if you exclude the Wild Man Merlin tales. Now, as for his kit, part of me wants to say that the strategy and planning behind some of the skills in Merlin's kit, mainly the two, are references to his prophetic abilities. Knowing when to use each ability, how exactly you have to put it down to get the enemy to step into it for maximum effect, or the CC in the arcane skills case to actually work, seems like a nice reference from the design standpoint. Again, the prophecies. Especially when you consider that a character who can see into the future, and who's aware of the limitations of his own powers, should know which two stances he'll need in any situation. After all, there's a cooldown after Merlin switches to a new stance, so he might need to plan before time which skills he wants to clear, poke, and secure kills with, respectively. As for the spells themselves, Flicker might reference Merlin's ability to travel great distances quickly, because it's a blink with a much shorter cooldown and a much shorter distance covered, so that's a tick box there. Other than that, you might argue that Elemental Mastery references Merlin's mastery of spells and magic, and that he's got all of these different skills under his belt quite nicely. The elements themselves, though, we don't know that much about Merlin's magic, and whether he's getting divine or demonic aids in conjuring the spells that he actually does use, if there's something else helping out with his powers, so it's hard to say that these elements and powers don't work in-game as they're given to us. And after all, Hi-Rez has a game to continuously pump out content for, right? Life's too short to sweat the small, undecided details. So yeah. Now, as for Merlin's role, the Mage, it's pretty easy to understand why this is perfect for Merlin's character, but if they decided to either A, include Merlin in the game as Mirrodin, who's a character from Celtic mythology and is actually someone who Merlin was based off of. His story is very similar to Wildman Merlin's story. And if you've seen previous videos on the channel and you know the whole story of Wildman Merlin, you know that the way he acts and how brutal he can be, it could very much fit the assassin class quite nicely, as well as also the warrior class. I mean, hell, he did survive on a pretty brutal battlefield, even though it changed him kind of severely. It could have been interesting to see how his story could have developed as Mirrodin, rather than Merlin, but we have Merlin, so I suppose we have Mirrodin. Now, moving on to the voice lines, if you had any doubts as to which version of Merlin that was being used in Smite, you can listen to the voice lines and more or less tell that it's the Merlin that was always by Arthur's side, not any other version. In the Merlin is proud, so in other words, not the kid Merlin that was potentially part demon, not a wild man Merlin, one that was helping King Arthur, or at least at a time when Merlin was helping King Arthur. Merlin is proud and bordering on boastful or even arrogant, and I doubt that any of the original Merlins would have talked like he does. He uses lines like,
"To perish like a mere mortal. How humiliating."
Just seems far-fetched from a character who's always communicating an air of calm, or that he's in control. There are exceptions, of course, like the time Wildman Merlin kind of lost his stuff when his closest friends were offed in front of him on the battlefield, or when he found out that King Arthur slept with his half-sister. That was also a concerning, troubling time for Merlin, I'm sure. But he usually behaves as if he understands his powers and how his abilities make him seem to everyone, the sort of image that they portray, and the great respect that comes with that. Yes, even as a madman who spent a lot of time with nature alone. But once his prophecies started ringing true, no one thought twice about it, not even the king. His reputation was great enough to allow a boy as young as 15 to become the new king, even if everyone wasn't exactly on board with this new change. So Smite's Merlin is definitely his own thing. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm sure we'll come to like Merlin, and personally, so far as how his kit's developing, he seems like the first god that's actually kind of fun out of a lot of the new gods for a while, so that's my personal opinion of it anyways. So now we have things at the end that I wasn't 100% sure about, didn't want to put them with the rest of the things to avoid confusion, but still wanted to mention and talk about it. Maybe we can come to an answer together in the comments. So the first thing I felt like mentioning was the whole claw mark besides Arthur's right eye, or around Arthur's right eye. I wasn't too sure what the meaning or symbolism behind this necessarily was. I found a couple of answers from Celtic, but of course that's Celtic mythology, not Arthurian legend, or Arthurian mythos, shall we say, Arthurian pantheon. Only reason I even feel like Celtic mythology is even relevant is just because it had inspirations for Merlin's character. The bear symbol, or the bear claw, those are supposed to reference a strong connection with nature, and they highlight a strong being. And Arthur's definitely a proud enough guy, it seems, within Smite to do that sort of thing. But it might also have some sort of connection with dragons, considering the fact that Merlin's character seems to be obsessed with dragons, or very concerned with dragons. We also don't necessarily know what his connection with Jormungandr is, why he was able to banish Jormungandr to his own realm necessarily. That could be explained. It could be explained through mythology, something I'm missing. So the second thing that I've sent to the end of the video here is Merlin's clothing. Now, at first glance, I wasn't too sure what to make of it, but I had been taking out some extra books and reading material for the Arthurian Pantheon, and stumbled across a couple of images that I haven't been able to find online anywhere, and these depict Merlin in a very different way to what he's seen wearing in Smite. The robes that he wore in those illustrations seem fairly different to what he wears in Smite. In Smite, it's a lot more elaborate, much more fitting clothes to adorn in the presence of the gods. A lot of the gods look fairly clean, pristine, not very dirty or unattractive in those sorts of ways, for the most part. And so you could just chalk most of Merlin's look down as far as the clothes are concerned to just fitting in with the Smite aesthetic there. Don't know if we should necessarily take away points for that. And also, he does include some nice little mage scrolls on the side of his character there. I wasn't necessarily able to find anything about Merlin using scrolls, so I'm not too sure what the deal with those are necessarily, so if anyone could tell me that would be pretty interesting. So, tell me, what do you think of Merlin? Do you like the aspects of the lore that Hyros has incorporated into his hidden character? Do you feel like they could have gone a better direction? Tell me your thoughts in the comment section below and let's have a bit of a discussion. And if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and tell me if there are any other gods you'd like me to sort of go over in this way, where I sort of take a specific god, see how they've been sort of represented in Smite, and decide how exactly lore accurate that they've been created, how good of a job Hyros has done in that aspect. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. But until the next video, have a very good day. I have been Prime, and I'll see you all in the next one.